Why are so many Americans living paycheck to paycheck? It's easy to point fingers. Depending on which media outlets and personalities you follow, the blame shifts. It's the politicians' fault, the billionaires' fault, the poor's fault, the immigrants' fault, the lazy's fault, the greedy's fault, etc. But what if it's not just one person or one group's fault? What if it's not that simple? The truth is, the economic reality we're living in today looks nothing like it did just a few decades ago. Our expectations haven't changed, but the world has. The system that once supported working people are no longer sustainable. We've been left to deal with the consequences of a modern economy based on the careless assumption that infinite growth is possible on a finite planet, often being blamed for the very conditions we didn't create and forced to make choices we never wanted to make. In this video, we're going to go over 7 of the biggest reasons why Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Not just the symptoms, but the root causes that explain why even working full-time doesn't guarantee a positive quality of life anymore. Make sure you stick around until the last reason. I'll paint the full picture and tie everything together. Reason 1. Stagnant wages in a growing U.S. economy. While the economy has grown and productivity has skyrocketed over the last few decades, wages for American workers have remained largely stagnant. According to a senior economist at the Center for Economic Policy and Research, if the federal minimum wage had kept pace with productivity since the late 1960s, it would be around $26 an hour today. Instead, it's been stuck at $7.25 per hour since 2009. This wage stagnation reflects political choices that have prioritized the needs of owners and investors over everyday workers. We've seen corporate tax cuts and rising profits, but not a desire to increase wages for the working class. In 2021, Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a proposal to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, but it was struck down in the Senate, not just by every Republican, but by 8 Democrats as well. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would benefit millions, since 1 in 4 Americans earn less than $15 an hour. Adding to this, unions, once a powerful force in advocating for fair pay, good benefits, and job security for the average American worker, have lost significant influence over time, which means that even as the economy grows, the needs of workers no longer have to be considered despite their sacrifices and contributions. This decline in union power leads us directly to our next point. Reason 2. Global competition and automation have reshaped work in America. The job market today is no longer local, it's global. With remote work and outsourcing now standard practice for companies to both survive and thrive, American workers are no longer competing with their neighbors, but a worldwide labor pool of billions of people who are more eager, more strategically educated, more skilled, and more willing to work for only a fraction of the pay. Automation, robotics, and AI are rapidly replacing jobs across industries, from manufacturing to tech. We've seen this with recent tech layoffs, where despite earning huge profits, companies still have found ways to cut off American workers in favor of outsourced labor and AI tools completely replacing humans. Even before this, machines in factories have been replacing human labor for decades. Cities and towns have suffered massive job losses, not only because of trade deals and global trade policies, but because factories moved away and machines replaced people. Experts have pointed out that the decline of industries such as the auto industry in cities like Detroit stemmed more from automation and the relocation of manufacturing to non-union states than from globalization or trade agreements alone. With high growth and significant productivity improvements due to tech and cheap labor, the need to pay workers for their time is quickly bottoming out unless we're a top AI researcher or engineer, or exceptionally talented at what we do. This boils down to a simple supply and demand issue. The supply of labor and technologies that can increase productivity has skyrocketed, while the demand for the average worker doing low value or low skilled tasks, for instance data entry and admin work, has plummeted. If we don't possess a unique set of skills and knowledge to offer employers that can't be easily duplicated or replaced, it becomes harder for us to ask for more compensation. Losing our leverage means that we can be underpaid or risk losing our jobs completely. Reason 3. The cost of living keeps rising. While wages have barely moved, the cost of simply existing in America has soared, especially since the pandemic. We're not just talking about inflation, we're talking about the entire picture. Housing, healthcare, childcare, car payments, and even food have become increasingly unaffordable for the average American. Government policies like money printing and shutdowns during the pandemic have contributed to the increased cost of living. But it's not just cheap money that got us at these high prices. We live in a society where basic human needs are commodified, and nearly every sector essential to survival is seen as a potential profit center. Healthcare costs are absurd, with or without insurance. In 2023, Americans spent about $13,432 per person on healthcare, nearly twice what peer nations spend on average, yet health outcomes in the country remain worse than countries spending far less. Childcare costs have now ballooned, sometimes costing as much as rent depending on where we live. In fact, in 39 states, childcare now costs more than a year's worth of college tuition. Grocery bills have risen over the years, and because of shrinkflation, we're paying for the same items but are getting less. That jar of pasta sauce, carton of milk, or tube of toothpaste might look the same, but when we're looking closely, the quantity inside might be less. Of course, now there's housing. The median rent in the US is now $1,600 a month, but in major cities like San Francisco, Boston, and Miami, a one-bedroom apartment can easily cost $2,600 a month or more. Home ownership, once the hallmark of the American dream, is now an afterthought, especially for millennials and Generation Z, who are just trying to stay afloat in today's economy. Meanwhile, corporate profit margins are at record highs, as many companies have taken advantage of inflation narratives to raise prices, not because their own costs have risen significantly, but to secretly squeeze out greater profits from exhausted consumers. It's a frustrating reality. While corporations rake in record profits, everyday Americans are left stretching every dollar. When there's nothing left to stretch, we turn to the only option available, which is reason for. Saving is nearly impossible, so debt fills the gap. This one is more of a symptom than a root cause, but it's a powerful indicator of just how insecure life has become for many Americans. According to the Federal Reserve's 2023 report on the economic well-being of U.S. households, about 37% of Americans wouldn't be able to cover a $400 emergency with cash or its equivalent. This means a surprise car repair, medical bill, or missed paycheck could send over a third of the country into financial distress. When we're out of money, we do what most people do. We reach out for our credit cards. We get into debt just to stay afloat, just to keep the lights on, just to pay the rent and utility bills on time, buy groceries, and cover basic needs. This becomes a cycle of survival where debt fills the gap between monthly income and monthly living expenses. In 2025, it's estimated that Americans spend an average of 11% of their income just paying down their monthly debt obligations. To put that in perspective, 11% of our income going towards credit card bills, auto loans, and personal debt is more than the marginal income tax rate for ultra-wealthy New Yorkers making over $25 million a year. The math just doesn't work. Wages remain relatively flat, but living expenses have gone up and interest compounds. Without real wage growth, the debt cycle only increases until it becomes unmanageable, and many Americans become trapped in a system where working harder doesn't lead to freedom, but prevents them from ending up homeless on the streets. Just when you think working harder might be the answer, there's another challenge that keeps many of us stuck. This one starts with what many of us were never taught. In a system as complex and profit-driven as ours, not knowing how money works can be devastating regardless of how much we earn. Unfortunately, financial literacy isn't something we're born with, and for many of us, it's not something we were ever properly taught. Maybe we got really bad advice. Maybe we assumed that everyone else was doing the right thing. The reality is, we don't have to be making minimum wage to struggle financially. We can be making multiple six figures and still be living paycheck to paycheck. Some of the reasons Americans live paycheck to paycheck are systemic and structural, but others come down to the decisions we make without fully understanding our choices. This shows up in the way we spend. Instead of buying a reliable used car for $15,000, we buy a new car for $45,000 and commit to a $750 per month payment for several years, not realizing how much interest we're also paying each month. Even if we earn more, lifestyle creep, spending more more as we earn more usually takes over, and suddenly we find ourselves financing a $70,000 or $80,000 luxury car. The paycheck to paycheck lifestyle just continues. Another trap we fall into is assuming that buying a house is always better than renting, because renting is throwing money away without actually running the numbers. We don't consider phantom costs such as house maintenance costs, property taxes, and insurance costs in our budgets. We rack up credit card debt for things we don't need with no plan to pay it off. We let lifestyle creep set in without stopping to ask whether it's sustainable or financially responsible and wise. According to the World Economic Forum, only around 50% of Americans are considered financially literate as of 2024. In fact, most Americans cannot correctly answer 3 basic questions from a financial literacy study conducted by a Cambridge University professor. Let's go over them right now. How many of these can you confidently answer? Hit pause to answer these next 3 questions on the screen. Question 1. Understanding the interest rate. Suppose you had $100 in a savings account and the interest rate was 2% each year. After 5 years, how much do you think you would have in the account if you left the money to grow? A. More than $102. B. Exactly $102. C. Less than $102. D. Don't know. E. Refuse to answer. Question 2. Understanding of inflation. Imagine that the interest rate on your savings account was 1% per year and inflation was 2% per year. After 1 year, would you be able to buy A. More than today? B. Exactly the same as today? C. Less than today? D. Don't know. E. Refuse to answer. Question 3. Understanding of risk diversification. Do you think the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual fund. A. True. B. False. C. Don't know. D. Refuse to answer. How did you do? Did you answer all 3 questions correctly? These aren't trick questions, they're foundational. But in a capitalistic system that depends on consumerism, the average person not knowing how money, credit, interest, or inflation works is extremely profitable. When we mix this with rising costs, flat wages, and easy access to credit, what do we get? We get a population that's earning more than ever, but somehow still falling behind. And even for those who are financially literate, who do budget, who try to make responsible choices and live within their means, it's still not enough for many people to stay ahead, because financial education alone isn't sufficient. Sometimes, no matter how smart or careful we are, the numbers just don't make sense through no fault of our own. This leads us to our next reason. Reason 6. Single people or single income households face higher pressure. Whether we're single and living alone or part of a household where only one person brings in income, the math is stacked against us. Fixed costs like rent, utilities, internet, and groceries don't adjust based on our relationship status. In many cities, living alone can mean spending 50% or more of our income just on rent. With only one paycheck to cover everything, there's little room to save, invest, or absorb unexpected expenses. Most of us understand this intuitively. In shared households between spouses, family members, or roommates, we're able to pool resources, split bills, create some financial breathing room, pay off our debts quicker, and even go out and have some fun. This reality is commonly referred to as the singles tax, which shines light on just how much more expensive it is to afford to live when we're covering our cost of living alone. A 2024 Zillow analysis estimates that this penalty costs single renters an average of over $7,500 annually, with cities like New York topping $20,000 in added yearly housing costs compared to shared living situations. The pressure isn't limited to those of us living alone. Even in households with a stay-at-home parent, living on a single income is rarely enough to keep up with the cost of living, despite the benefit of certain tax breaks for married couples. When both parents work, childcare becomes an added expense. Nowadays, building and maintaining a good quality of life requires 2 incomes. For most of us, it's no longer optional like it was decades ago. This is also a risk issue. What happens when the one income earner earner in a married household gets laid off, becomes sick or injured, or is unable to work for any reason, without a second source of income or a strong support system, that household can fall into financial distress almost immediately. We hear about this all the time, whether it's in the news or within our communities, where when somebody loses a job, not long after, they're forced to downsize, sell their home if they have a mortgage, and move. What happens to married couples when they get divorced, especially the women who end up living in poverty? The poverty rate for divorced women over 50 years old in America is 27%. Unfortunately, our culture glorifies independence. We're taught that moving out on our own and owning a house is a true marker of adulthood and success. But the modern economy no longer rewards this path, at least not for the average wage earner. There's a growing mismatch between what we've been told to strive for and what actually works in today's economy. But what if part of the struggle isn't just about how much we make or spend, but what's no longer there to support us if and when things go wrong? The next reason makes it hard to believe we'll be taken care of during life's inevitable misfortunes. Reason 7, the erosion of long-term stability and safety nets in America. According to a recent Ipsos Consumer Tracker report, only about 37% of Americans feel very or somewhat comfortable with their personal financial situation. This represents a 14% drop since November 2024. While many Americans still have access to retirement accounts, insurance, and government assistance programs, the systems that once provided a strong safety net have been stretched thin, and in some cases struggle to keep pace with today's economic and societal shifts, including longer lifespans and rising costs. As of 2025, the U.S. national debt has surpassed $37 trillion. According to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, interest payments on this debt have grown tremendously, exceeding what the government spent on Medicare and national defense in 2024. As more funds and government borrowing tools like issuing bonds are used to manage debt and sustain spending, the likelihood of meaningfully reducing deficit spending and lowering the national debt seems low. This creates a ripple effect, where austerity measures are needed to reduce costs and avoid raising taxes, usually at the expense of vulnerable populations. At the same time, individual financial risk is rising. Healthcare remains one of the leading causes of personal bankruptcy, and retirement security is often tied to unpredictable market conditions. The 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 pandemic both showed how quickly job security, savings, and retirement plans can collapse in the face of systemic shocks. Given the economic realities of our country, our national spending priorities, and a culture that values independence and self-sufficiency, long-term instability has become a profitable reality for many Americans, making it even more important that we're able to care for ourselves and our loved ones without overly relying on local, state, or even federal support, including natural disaster relief from agencies like FEMA. When this kind of structural instability becomes the norm, it's no surprise that so many people find themselves living paycheck to paycheck, not because they're irresponsible, but because they're forced to fend for themselves and take on most, if not all, of the risk of living. The reasons Americans are living paycheck to paycheck vary from region to region and state by state. The more we understand the full picture, the better chance we have of trying to get ahead and maybe even show up differently in our society as both workers and consumers. If you found this video insightful, subscribe to State of America for more grounded takes on what's really going on across the country.